This week, we're talking all about rivals, how to make them as a DM and implement them to go up against your player characters at different levels, and how to build one as a PC and put it into your backstory. Welcome to We Speak Common. Hello and welcome to the D&D podcast for everyone, because here we speak common. This is the show brought to you in partnership with the Dice Dungeon, who, despite their name, have branched out into more than just D&D dice. You can grab yourself official WotC published books, as well as things like spell cards and miniatures, amongst, of course, all the wonderful dice that they keep in their dungeon right now on their website, shipped from the UK. I pretty much think worldwide. If you want to get 10% off, you can use the code We Speak Common on checkout for your whole basket, and of course there is a link in the description below. We're also brought to you in partnership with Describe, who are your one-stop shop for brilliantly crafted box text for your home adventure. If you want to enhance that theatre of the mind sense of your game, which I absolutely love, all you have to do is head over to describe.com, look for the scene you want, and read it out to transport your players into your beautifully crafted world. It brings it to life. They've got over 1,500 scenes on there right now, and it's growing. There's a load of them available for free, and if you want access to everything, there are a number of different subscription levels you can jump on using the code COMMON for 10% off every single month. Description has a link to that, but it's dscryb.com. As ever, I will at some point try and sell those shamelessly to my guests during this episode. Of course, I would be amiss to not mention the Patreons who support this show and make it just a little bit easier every month to get things together. If you want to check out that and support the show directly, links in the description and available on social media. That's Twitter, Instagram, and pretty much anywhere else you find podcasts on the internet. Today, I am joined by DM of the Wandering Bards of Wildemount, Tariq. Hello, buddy.
Hello. Yes.
How are you?
I am doing very well. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really, really good. And I'm super excited to get you on, because we've been chatting a little bit in the background for, a couple of months now, maybe?
Yes.
And I've been sort of itching to get you on and chat to you, DM to DM, at some point. So I'm excited that we're finally here.
It's going to be wonderful. I'm very much looking forward to the creativity and knowledge that's going to burst out of this conversation. Everyone's just going to get a lot out of it. It's great. I don't want to big myself up or anything, but I'm sure it'll be great.
Let's not oversell it. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what sort of tier I'm on today, but we'll give it a good go. Do you want to just sort of introduce yourself to anyone who may not be familiar with your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Tariq. I am a DM, as you mentioned, for the Wandering Bards of Wildemount. It's a D&D actual play podcast that I play with three of my friends who are real-life bards. Essentially, what we do is they go around and work through and play through adventures in the Wildemount setting. And whenever they cast a spell or do anything that might kind of indicate that they need to play their instrument, they'll roll and play those instruments live on the podcast. So it's kind of a mesh between live music and also D&D and all that sort of fun stuff. Yeah.
It's really cool. It's really unique as well. I remember hearing about the show and I was like, this is such a good idea. Like, how has nobody else done this yet? So I was super stoked to tune in. Annoyingly, my weekly scheduled D&D game kind of happens at the midpoint of your game, so I have to catch up here and there. But from what I've got through so far, it's such a fun take on this weird hobby that we all love. So you are doing the many gods work.
Thank you very much, sir. That is a true honor coming from you. But I'm really interested. I mean, we're just kicking off and just seeing the reception that we've had so far with what we're doing and people just like really getting into it. It's just been so much fun to be able to play this game that we all love and share music with people that are into it and stuff. So yeah, it's great.
Absolutely. And your guys are actual bards. They release actual music as well. So if you like what you hear in the show, there are actual albums, aren't there?
Yeah, so they are classically trained musicians. They're in a group called the Wandering Bard, and all of their music is available on all kind of like streaming platforms. So if you like what you hear and you want to hear like a whole album full of music, then they've got that stuff. They've also they've just released an album that's all about like stories behind King Henry VIII and stuff, and all about those different stories surrounding his life and all of the people around his life and stuff. So it's very interesting and an interesting take on history as well. So yeah,
that's so cool. And how long have you been playing D&D for?
I have been playing D&D for maybe about like 3 or 4 years, so I'm like still in that sort of I don't know, like call it like a honeymoon phase, but just it was one of those things that like it just hit me like a tidal wave when I had it, and I just discovered it and just went all in. It's we all have our different avenues with how we discovered it. Mine was through Critical Role and just watching the fun that these like nerdy voice actors were having, and I was just like, I need to get in on that. I need to do that. And as soon as I started playing, I was like really gravitated towards the DM chair and the story mechanics behind it, because before I was in D&D, I did a lot of work and stuff in kind of filmmaking, and I did a little bit of music and myself. So creativity and writing and storytelling has always been around my life. So finding that and meshing it with D&D in that interesting way has always been something that I've wanted to do. And when I discovered it, I was like, this is the best outlet for everything, because there's no pressure. I can always just say, this is a game, and all of my friends are having a game, and I can just put all of these interesting ideas, and I don't have to turn it into a book or release it into an album, but it's a collaborative thing where everyone has agency to put their mark on the story, and it's awesome.
Yeah, 100%. We're quite similar, I think, because first of all, you talk about the honeymoon period. I think I'm like nearly 8 or 9 years into this hobby now, and that honeymoon period hasn't finished. So
it might all be a honeymoon period for all I know.
It's just there for us. But I was quite similar. I found D&D before. When I was a bit younger, before I'd really sort of taken off and taken my hobbies into more of a career progression, and it triggered with me so well, and it clicked in with everything that I love, and I couldn't work out why. And then I did filmmaking, and I did presenting and radio work and audio creation, like features and podcasts and things, and creating stories that way. And I sort of realized I realized why I like D&D so much. It's just storytelling, and it's weird how like
you go around and then the Venn diagram just always just lands in this thing, which is D&D. It's just like, oh yeah, it's that thing. It's like all of the things that I love just all put into one, and I've just discovered this now, and I'm just never going to leave it now.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine a world where I wouldn't be playing, and like my Phoebe and I, we have plans to get out on the road and live on the road for a bit when the world reopens. And even then I was thinking like, okay, well, I can't take my books in our camper van. There's too many of them. But I have digital versions, and as long as I've got a 4G router, we can still get a weekly game in. So,
oh my god, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I was like, how do I make the van soundproof for the podcast? So it's never leaving me. It's just part of my life now.
Amazing.
So this is a Tinker's Toolbox episode, which tends to be more... I try and make the Tinker's Toolbox more mechanical, but I think this topic will be less of that. It might be a little bit... There'll be bits of it, but I think it'll be a bit more about storytelling than mechanics. But I wanted to talk about rivals, because I actually think someone in the Discord, one of the Patreons, suggested this topic. It's something that is mentioned in passing in some of the books, making rivals for your player characters, or maybe as a player creating a rival as part of your backstory. But it's never really just built on. There's kind of the skeleton of it, and there's bits of it in Xanathar's, and even in that, I think it's like 2 pages at most. There are a couple of examples of some rivals, and there are some baseline suggestions on how you could do it. And I think it's something that I've seen in a lot of places. So obviously, if you are a fan of Critical Role, they've had some very rival-esque characters in the Tomb Takers. I won't get into the story because I'm not caught up, but also spoilers if you are watching it. There's a rival mentioned as an optional thing in Dragon Heist and that came out, this time last year, or a bit earlier or later. So it's kind of in there as a theme, and I've never seen it really built on. And I wanted to talk about how we might do it, what's the best way to implement it, when's the right time to use it, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Have you ever popped a rival in a game for your party?
I am currently working on something like that, popping in a rival for the bards in my party as kind of a campaign sort of big bad sort of villain. And I've been thinking about this, and it's cool when you asked me to talk about this sort of subject. I was thinking about it in different ways, and I realized that you can have rivals at different levels of bosses in your campaign, and I've kind of split it in terms of how big an influence do you want your rival to be for your party. So the sort of thing that I'm working on for my campaign is I want to create a rival as a big bad. Now, typically this would work really well if you're doing it as a solo sort of campaign, but it's the idea with rivals is that they're highly personal and they're tailored to your party. So if there's a specific trait or a specific element that you want to implement, you got to allow them to interact with your party in other ways than just combat. So maybe your party is really interested and has a love interest. This rival might walk in and flirt with the love interest. They might take credit for something that the party has done. But the main thing with this kind of big boss level or like big bad level of rival that I'm kind of working on is thinking about what is the central theme or question that your characters are trying to answer or represent, and then come up with a different answer to that question. So spoilers for anyone that listens to the Wandering Bards of Wildemount, but I DM for a party of bards, right? So their whole idea is around expressing their creativity. So I'm currently working on a villain who's the antithesis of that and looking to express views, who has views of creativity as a crutch to society. Maybe a mage that's just very rules orientated and just very focused on things need to be a certain way, and everything that's just kind of flowing from sort of ideas or inspiration is just people who haven't worked hard enough for what they want.
I like that. I really like that. And it's a good place to start if you're really struggling to sort of personalize your big bad to the parties to just directly oppose them. You know, it's like get that cornerstone in there and then build their characteristics or their certain traits around that to make them more unique and a bit more interesting. And it's fun that you say, it's interesting that you say you went straight for making your rival the big bad. I think that's the go-to because everyone wants their party to have a connection with their villain. They don't want them to just be like, oh, that's the bad guy and we're going to go stop him. They want it to be a bit more in depth than that. But there are definitely those levels where you can have an anti-hero rival who kind of helps the party but also kind of doesn't, which is something I've done before. You can have a rival that is literally something as simple as, well, they were childhood friends and they bullied the player when they were a kid, you know, and now they're both grown up and they're both in a similar line of work, so they're both working towards the same goal, but the rivalry is that, well, I want to achieve it, not you, because I'm better than you. So yeah, there's lots of options there, and I think if you find something that makes sense as a key cornerstone, and I've talked about cornerstones a lot for characterization, but if you find something that you can really pin and anchor that down on, then you're starting off with a really good solid groundwork.
Exactly.
I had in, what was it? It was in Dragon Heist, which, I mean, surprise, I don't ever stop talking about Dragon Heist. I love that campaign so much. I took the Black Viper, that's her name, who is an optional character. She's kind of in the book and is like, hey, you can use this if you want to, but it's not really part of the story. And I knew that Joe's character, Kaori, was going to be very thieving and wanted to be like the thief of Waterdeep, effectively. And I built up that the Black Viper was that. And without even thinking about the other characters, I'd positioned her to be this rival / competition, maybe love interest for Joe's character. And he kind of picked it up. But what was interesting is that one of the other characters, Phoebe's character, sort of attached herself to her and went out and tried to work out who she was, because she has like a Catwoman secret identity, and B, befriend her and learn from her. And that made that rivalry with Joe's character in the Black Viper even stronger. So having that side character as the rival it's definitely a fun sort of subplot to make your game feel a little bit more alive, make your world feel like it's lived in.
Definitely. And having a space for sort of an anti-hero type person that interacts with the characters in a different sort of way, that might not always be friendly, but might not always be in a completely antagonist sort of point, where they might interact or intersect with similar goals and stuff, is a really, really good way of implementing a rival. So in my kind of research and looking into this as other sort of levels in terms of implementing rivals, the next level down after the big bad I was thinking of is sort of a threshold boss. And this is the one that we've typically seen a lot in a lot of media. So like in Critical Role, like you mentioned, the Tomb Takers, that's a situation where a party of rivals might really, really shine, because they're not essentially a big bad, but they might be working for someone who's at a slightly kind of larger level. And here you think about one or two aspects of each player character and what they represent, just like you were talking about, and what defines them as characters. And then you pick on one of them and then try and represent that in each specific rival. I think that's a really interesting way of having a sort of another sort of rival type character in your game.
Yeah, and what's nice about that as well is you can really spin it on its head. So you can have a party as, how do I phrase this? Each member of the rival party is a rival, but the in sense of like, oh, I'm going to have a rival to my party, the entire party is one rival. And I like that gives a little bit of movement around and dynamic sort of synergy around the character building, because you've got all these singular people who, yeah, they're rivals to the party, but one against, let's say, 4 as a typical party size isn't going to do anything, but you bring them all together in a group of another 4 and you've got an actual confrontation going on. And they are a nice mini boss because you've got that whole thing of, well, just like the players are a group of adventurers out doing their own thing, these guys are a group of adventurers out doing their own thing, and it gives that party that kind of introspective look at how do outside people see our characters. I read something the other day that was like, you know, a player character walking into a small town and paying for a 3 silver room with 2 pieces of gold isn't normal. If you did that in the real world, people would look at you like you were shady as fuck. Like, where did you get all this cash from? So it gives them that side of chance. And the other thing as well is, if you don't want them to be working directly with the big bad, a rival party can be fun as a sort of comes in and goes away sort of mini boss. Like they come in for an adventure, you butt heads a bit, and then they go away because they've got other adventures to go on. But later down the line, when the party least expect it, who do they bump into in the dungeon? It's that rival party who are looking for the same thing. And rather than having an all-out, we must kill these people because they're bad, you have this fun back and forth kind of competition instead.
Exactly. And competition is really the right word to kind of hone in on at this level, I think, because these guys aren't necessarily such a higher level compared to what the party are. Maybe they're just a little bit more stronger, but there's always a threat that this sort of level of party might go with the right die rolls. So it's all about interesting ways that you can intersect them with that party. So going back to kind of where we've seen this in sort of media and stuff, Dr. Anna Ripley from Campaign 1 of Critical Role is a really good example of a rival that rivals one of the player characters. There's a link there between intelligence of her and one of the player characters, Percy, but lacks the creativity that they do in terms of their sort of designs. The main thing is that you want to make them similar enough to one of your characters that when they see them, the desire to best them is going to be instant and real. And if you're creating a party of these kind of rivals, you want to try and imagine, or maybe tailor an encounter where you can imagine at least one of them on a one-on-one fight. You could have maybe a bunch of bad guys and they encounter one of this rival party members. So most of the party are taking on these group of monsters while they're fighting, and that you can imagine a party with a sort of barbarian and a sort of orcish barbarian person that's just wailing on each other one-on-one, or paladin v paladin type thing. That can make for a really interesting and cathartic piece of combat if you can work that into your story.
Yeah, and I always think, I was talking to Sam about this quite recently because he was creating a similar kind of group of anti-heroes. Looking at them mechanically, there are lots of stat blocks in, I think Tholos has a lot of the more character-based stat blocks, like the Warlock of the Archfey and things like that. But you can use those stat blocks. My advice would be to take some of the player character abilities and put them across. So, for example, in Tomb of Annihilation, one of the NPCs, Zandala, is a dragon bloodline sorcerer, and on her stat block she has Quicken Spell, and she can do it 3 or 4 times a day, something like that. So instantly giving her that ability makes her feel a bit more special and a bit more dynamic compared to other quote-unquote creatures that the party are going to come against. So if you're creating an anti-hero paladin, maybe an Oathbreaker paladin, if you're going typical evil party, make sure they've got the ability to use some spell slots to smite. Maybe they can smite 3 times a day. And just in saying in the combat to your party, okay, what's his name? Horay the Horrible is going to smite on this attack, they're going to instantly go, what a name. Where did that come from?
Yeah, that just came out of nowhere.
That's how my
amazing.
DM brain works.
That's just amazing. Just pulling it straight out of the Mind Palace.
My Mind Palace is a mess. It needs a good clean. Trust me, you don't want to go in there. Yeah, so just saying that he is going to smite on the attack makes your players go, oh, this guy's different. He's not a standard champion or something.
Yeah.
They don't have to know what his stat block is, but you giving them that information during the combat is going to make them stick their backs up and go, okay, something's going on here. These guys are special.
And just those little things that you can sprinkle in during an encounter or combat just takes him from just being another encounter boss or another monster to just a little bit higher than that, and something that can really create a true rivalry between the player characters and this person. Even things like a title like you used, or the certain way that you describe them if you have similar abilities to one of the player characters, and just the way that you work in those descriptions to what you're doing in the game is if you put enough emphasis on it and enough emphasis behind it, it will work in a way where the players will clock onto it and be like, there's something real bad or special about this dude. I'm not sure I'm onto it. He needs to go, or they need to go.
Yeah. I think we as DMs often forget the power that we have in the way we describe things. It's something that I kind of honed back into recently. In our last game of Tomb of Annihilation, we had a character death, and it was a very specific situation where the party had been up against a small group of undead, and they'd made a lot of noise, which had attracted a much tougher skeleton vine troll. And so they were all very much on last legs, low hit points, pretty much exhausted spell slots. And they had the choice to either stay the night and risk someone else wandering in, or going into the jungle and potentially running into something else but finding a safer spot. They decided to stay, and I described these 2 undead wandering in, because the dice rolled that 2 more wandered in. But the way I described them were 2 zombies or 2 undead who were shambling, but they were staying very, very close to each other, like almost like you couldn't see between them. And I described it in such a way that the players thought, oh, these are just 2 standard zombies. We'll just deal with them. We won't make the party up. The 2 of us will go and kill them. But when they got closer and had light sources and could actually see the creatures, they saw that they were fused and they were something different. And so the descriptive power of really thinking about what the players see and what it looks like compared to what it is sets up a different scene in their head. And it led to a player death. It was all fair, but it was very impactful. And that situation came about because of the language that I tried to use to give a sense of a little bit of something different, but also fake confidence as well.
Definitely.
And you can do that with anything, absolutely anything.
Yeah, definitely. That idea of fake confidence is definitely something that's we could do a whole other topic on, but it's just that's a whole interesting way of making sure that your party are aware that what they're coming up against, just because it looks like it might not be the biggest threat in the world, like putting those descriptions in there to be like, no, this isn't just any other zombie. Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. I I was thinking about this as well, and I had, or use an example from, I was having a conversation to one of my friends who's a DM running his own campaign, running Lost Mines of Found Denver at the moment, and building his own group of rival adventurers. And that party that he was DMing for was essentially, they befriended a goblin NPC in one of the in one of the mines, and they were looking to instill him as a leader of Phandalin in a
Wow.
in this so it's already gone off the rails, but it's great because what he wanted to do is he wanted to introduce a rival party led by a human rogue mastermind woman who wanted control of the city of Phandalin. So what the party was looking at doing was almost running some sort of election campaign to instill their goblin friend as the leader of Phandalin. And then what it led to in our conversation when we were trying to work out ways to kind of steer the story in a sense, he was thinking, okay, well, they need to get rid of this goblin friend person. What can we do? Maybe she leads to ambush them. He's already weaved in threads of introducing these rival characters, but the party aren't necessarily aware that this roguish character is the rival and a bad sort of evil person that they'll run into. So it's about looking at ways that they can ambush him, or certain threads or things in the story that they can find that will lead them towards that rivalry between those two factions. But I also like the way of just having that under the undercurrent of an election campaign in a D&D game as well. That's quite funny. So yeah, there's loads of different things you can do.
One of the most funs I had as a player was in the Descent game that James runs for me, and I said to him, I want to play a character that's tied into the story, and you can do what you want with it. But here's my idea. And I was a noble who basically leveraged everything he did for the people that he saved to get them to vote for him to be a duke. So there was this whole like underlining play of I've saved you from a dungeon and you have power in this city, so how do I make sure you know that now you owe me? And that undercurrent is a lot of fun.
Almost a contract every time he does anything nice in a way or helps anyone out.
Actually worked really well because he was in league with devils, so the whole contract thing was perfect. It just a foreshadow the future.
Amazing.
And he is now a Duke of Baldur's Gate, so long may he reign.
There you go.
Eventually to be Grand Duke, of course. He has aspirations. But I go off course. I think the other thing with rival parties, when you're sitting down and building them, obviously you need to think about each member of the party as full-fleshed as you would a character for a player, because they are going to have that much impact on your players if done right. They're going to want to know, like the players going to want to know what they stand for and why they stand for it, and there will probably be conversations if your players aren't complete, murder hobos and want to just kill them because they're against them. Yeah. But the other thing is to think about the stat blocks, and that for me is the hardest thing. I'm much more of a storyteller than a statistician, and working out synergies and things is tricky, but it's, I think, really important for rival parties is to have abilities that play off each other. So, if you've got an evil paladin, say, and he's got an aura that allows the other melee combatants to get advantage on their swings, make sure that they have something that lets them utilize the fact that if they're near him, they get advantage. So maybe they get something extra when they get advantage on a swing, and make sure they feel like a unit who work together, because my experience anyway is that my players always feel like that, and they always cakewalk my encounters when they play that way. And if I were to put a rival party up against them, I'd want them to feel that fear that my creatures fear when they get their A game on.
Definitely. And looking at it from more of a mechanical point of view on that end is, it's super important because, I think we as DMs we tend to gravitate towards the story aspect and how we want to thread those in. But just like you were saying, party synergy is so important when you're trying to implement that and give the players that feeling. So just like you're saying, thinking about different ways that certain abilities that your rival party will have will intertwine and react together, and certain combos that you can think about out in the prep aspect that might help or might work out in a certain way, depending on initiative order and all that sort of stuff. But think about certain combos and certain things that you can do to really give that feeling of this is a cohesive unit, just like you're saying. It's really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, there are lots of other things to think about when building rivals. We are scratching the surface, and a lot of that stuff can be found in places like the DMG. They have rules on creating your own creatures and things, so have a look at those, have a read of them. And if you don't have a copy of the DMG, there's a really good place to get them. I don't know if you've heard of these guys, Tariq, but Dice Dungeon are now selling D&D official books. Did you know that?
I did hear about this somewhere. They have Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft available to pre-order. Is that right?
I'm not going to lie to you. I have already pre-ordered my copy.
I have asked Ben to hold on to a little copy for me on the side. So that's gonna be coming my way when it finally gets released. I'm very excited.
I'm so excited, and I will definitely be doing some sort of dive into that book on the podcast. But yeah, if you want to get your hands on any of the released or to be released D&D books, Dice Dungeon is now your one-stop shop and the best place to go, because technically they are a friendly local game store, which means you can get the limited edition covers from them. And of course, if you use the old discount code We Speak Common, you'll get 10% off too, your entire basket. So if there's any books you've been meaning to collect, or maybe some spell cards, or maybe just a lovely set of dice, go and have a look, and they will definitely help you build some rivals. There is one other thing that will help with rivals, and that's beautifully crafted box text too. Now, I know that you have had a look at Describe before, my friend. So I have gone to go and pick a random scene, and I thought I'd hopefully get one you haven't read before.
Okay.
So I'm gonna read you this scene, and then I want you to try and guess what it is.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
And it's ironic because this scene starts with a certain line, but here we go.
I'm ready.
You know what this is, all right? You do know. Such satchels are famed in bards' tales, topical, and coveted by every treasure hunter worthy of being called an adventurer. It is a bag of holding. Your mind reels at what treasure might have been hidden inside by its former owners. Tariq, what is that?
Well, I was going to say bag of holding, but then bag of holding is in the description. So then I thought maybe it's like it's a ruse, and it's like maybe it's not a bag of holding, and it's like something else that looks like a bag of holding, but might not be one.
You're pretty close. It's a bag of devouring.
Oh no!
Oh, the best item ever. You stick something in there and it goes.
If I was a player in that campaign, I definitely think that was a bag of holding, and just grab it straight away and be like, "This is going to be great." And no. Definitely dead.
Yep, unfortunately not. There are hundreds of scenes on Describe like that. That's one of the free ones. If you want to go and get some beautifully crafted box text for your campaign on locations, spells, or items, then head over to dscryb.com. And of course, Common, the code, gets you 10% off your monthly subscription if you want to jump in and get access to over 1,500 scenes, which is a ridiculous amount, and they're adding every week. So go and check those out. Man.
We recently used the Rowdy Inn description for our latest episode. When I was we had a flashback episode that I was like prepping just out last minute, and then we were getting stuff together. I was like, I need an inn description. I just used this Rowdy Inn description. It was just so great to just implement straight. It just slips straight into the campaign, straight into the scene. Definitely really good, because they've got little like adventure prompts and stuff that happen in the description text as well. It's really, really cool.
I need to go and find this one now, because there is a secret project I'm working on that may include an inn today. How is Rowdy spelled?
Rowdy, I think.
Oh, okay, cool.
You're asking a dyslexic person, so that might be completely wrong. But
that's okay. I am also... Well, see, this is the thing. I was tested once, and they said, literally, I'm not even joking to you when I tell you that the person testing me to see if I had dyslexia said, "No, you're pretty close, but you might just be an idiot."
That's amazing.
I was like, oh, great, thanks.
Yeah.
So I haven't activated my membership with Describe because I had to swap my email over, and I can't read the Rowdy Inn, which makes me really sad. So I'm going to go and re-sign up so I can get access to it for later. But there you go. If you've got a membership, you can go and read the Rowdy Inn. It's a weird sentence. So rivals then. We've got the fun in big bads and a rival party, and we've talked a bit about synergy and stat blocks. There's one other type of rival that I personally have a place in my heart for, and that is the anti-hero. And I don't know if technically you can call Jarl Axel an anti-hero, but in my mind he is. If you don't know who Jarl Axel is, we'll do a Legends of Lore on him one day. He is a Forgotten Realms character who has popped up in many books and adventures, and most recently popped up in Dragon Heist, and so therefore played a big role in my campaign. And my players had a very interesting relationship with him. He's a scoundrel, a bit of a roguish character. He plays people off each other to get his own wants, but he's not exactly evil, in my world anyway. He kind of does bad things for his own reasons, which are sometimes kind of admirable, like trying to get his city recognised within the Lord's Alliance, which isn't a bad thing. But the players met him, and he was very sort of sly and charming, and he invited them to dinner, and they'd killed his group without him knowing. So he was very nice to them and wanted to proposition them to help him. And obviously they said no, because they knew that he was going to find out that they'd done something very bad against him. And so later on, when he reappeared, he came in at a very crucial moment, revealed that he'd been spying on the players the whole time, because he's very tricksy, and had a very antagonistic sort of place in the story where he said, basically, give me what I want, or I'm going to let my guys do what they want to you. They're mad that you killed their friends. And they defeated him, and they let him live, which I'm so happy for. But he was a very interesting rival, because he started off in that kind of space where potentially he could be an ally, but they kind of knew that he would maybe double cross them if it was advantageous to him, or he might maybe have a secret ulterior motive. So they knew he was kind of not really a potential ally. He was more of a rival. Then he definitely was a rival, and then at the end again they kind of had the upper hand, and he wasn't a rival, but he kind of was, because they'd humiliated him and stolen his magic items. But also he was an ally because he's very powerful and he knows who they are. So it's this really weird, interesting, evolving relationship, and that for me is like the most dynamic form of rival in a game.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about this in kind of like with a tinkerer's toolbox kind of brain on it, because when you're describing, you're talking about Jarl Axel and how your party interacted with him, and the famous We Speak Common scene of the dinner party where the party interacted with him not without his knowledge that his sort of assassins had died. What I'm thinking of in terms of advice to listeners and advice to players is that the anti-hero's difference between this and a sort of more antagonistic boss is that they have a specific goal that they want to achieve, and they are willing to compromise their morals and become any sort of interact with the party in any sort of way that they need to further their progress towards their goals. That's the way I'm kind of thinking about this, is that if they need to be allies with the party, they'll be allies with the party, but they're always thinking about the end thing that they want to achieve and how they can get closer to that thing. Whereas some might just, have a specific thing and will not compromise because that's against their views or their values. I see an anti-hero as someone who will shift that line a little bit, as long as it gets them closer to where they want to be.
Yeah, they'll do whatever they need to. I think as well, their goal doesn't have to be directly linked into their campaign. Like, for example, let's say your players are trying to stop stereotypical story. They're trying to stop the release of a demon, right? And to do that, they need to get an item. So instead of having the anti-hero's goal be to do with the demon, it could be to do with something along the way, like the potential item. So maybe the anti-hero wants to do something, and to do that, they need the item. And so they decide to work with the players to get to the item, because it's locked away in a dungeon somewhere that's very dangerous. But when they get there, the players have this kind of sense that they might backtrack and double cross them and steal the item for their own good. But the players need the help to get to it because it's very difficult to get to. And so you have this strange kind of working relationship that's half ally, half rival, and that's really fun to not only role play but to just watch unfold and see what kind of chaos you can spin amongst the group as that NPC.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about it like that. And I think the key things to think and to take away here is like, think about what your anti-hero can offer the party to achieve what they want to achieve, and what the anti-hero wants as their end goal, and where they're willing to compromise on that line. Just like you're talking about, do they need to get somewhere? Can the anti-hero offer them a space of travel or something like that, or a certain item or something that they can help? And then what's their end goal? How do they want to achieve that? And where can they get to? Is it going to be a case of double crossing them a little bit later on in the story? Or is it going to be a case of helping them and just keeping them sweet because the anti-hero knows they'll need the party's help later on with something bigger?
Yeah, definitely. Before we spin this on its head and look at rivals from a player's perspective, there is one thing I want to talk about, and that's using rivals for your players rather than their characters. And what I mean by that is that when I run D&D, I run all of my games in the same world. And so currently I'm running a Forgotten Realms campaign. And everything from the last 3 campaigns has happened in this version of the Forgotten Realms. And that version of the Forgotten Realms exists in the greater multiverse where all my other games exist. So at my table, everything that's happened has happened somewhere in the universe. That's kind of the rule that I roll with. And because we're focused on Forgotten Realms at the moment, that means that the outcomes of Dragon Heist, the Xanathar being murdered and Joe's character Kaori taking over the guild, are things that are currently happening in the world they're playing, and they're playing as different characters. So they might hear about one of their old characters who has done something, or they might come across a member of their Zentarum who Lilith, an older character, has, who is now in a position in the Zentarum to be in charge, has sent out to do something. They hear little mentions, and it's a fun little thing. And I do that because it gives me the power to think about my D&D games in 2 ways. I can think about it in the sense of the characters and what the characters experience and know, and the players at the same time. So I was really happy that when the table had Jarlaxle basically with his pants down, caught, and they were like, do we kill him or do we let him go? They decided to let him go after they stripped him of all his items. Because that meant that in the future, potentially in this campaign, who knows? I don't want to spoil it if any of the players are listening. He might come up, who knows? I don't know yet. If they come across him, their characters won't know who he is. They'll meet him for the first time. But the players, when I say you see a drow, he's dressed in a purple leather tunic, and you can see that on his head he wears a hat with a giant feather coming out of it. Just from that description, all of the players go, oh, for fuck's sake, it's this guy.
Yeah.
He's back. And that then creates a rival for the players and not for the characters, which is like a whole different level. So I highly encourage everybody to think of it in that way, because even if you're playing a game in a different world or in a different timeline, these characters still exist and the players will still have their emotions and their connections to them. And it actually forces some fun roleplay because they have to act differently as their characters with that NPC. It's a lot of fun.
It scratches a similar itch to something else that I think you guys have talked about on the podcast, which is where you introduce a character into the story that maybe your characters are not aware of, but your players are. So you talked about, I think it was with James, where in your campaign, the characters ran into Volo, but they weren't aware that Volo was there, and he was still there handing them that book. And that's rather than a rival, that's more from an NPC sort of perspective, but it's still scratching that same itch as like, this is something that I am a player, I'm aware of, and my sort of meta knowledge of the game is that this is really cool, and because I'm so invested in the lore and everything, I know that this is something I'm really interested in. But yeah, having that from the player's perspective in terms of their own previous characters as well is really, really cool, and definitely something I'm going to work into in my game as well, I think. Yeah,
it's like using meta knowledge but for the power of good rather than evil.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do that all the time. It kind of, sometimes it borders on like fan service. I've got to be honest. Like, I knew that James, like when we were playing a campaign that was centered in Waterdeep, James was like, what if Elminster turns up? And I was like, do you know what, right at the end, when the Lords Alliance have their big meeting and there's these 3 massive problems happening that are going to launch off our next 3 campaigns, I'm going to have Elminster be there because, you know, he is basically a big person who does important things for the city. And only James knew who he was. Like, I didn't say his name, I called him by his title, I described him in a very particular way. None of the other players knew who he was, but James was sitting there with a little smile on his face. I was like, okay, mission achieved, like accomplished, tick that
it's all
off.
worth it. It's all worth it just to watch the little eye, like the eye like glint in their eyes, and they're just like, I know what you're doing, Ben.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. Okay, so as a player then, creating a rival in your backstory, and this I think is a lot simpler than being a DM, because you don't have to do any of the hard work, you leave it to your DM, which is lovely. And as a DM, I always appreciate when a player comes to me with a written backstory and they say, okay, here's the name of my mum and my dad and my sister, and oh, by the way, here's this kid that I used to know who I hate with a passion, who is probably out there doing something, here's his name and why I hate him. For me, that's gold dust, because you've just given me a rival pre-made, and all I've got to do is stat it out and work out how I'm going to roleplay them, and that's chef's kisses. Perfect, wonderful. But how do you build that rival for your character that's going to fit in the sense of the campaign that you're going to play? That's the question, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, you gotta think about the ways that this rival from this player's backstory is going to intersect with the story and what their goals are and what they want to achieve. It kind of goes back to something I talked about earlier at the start of the episode, which is like, what's the central theme? What's the idea that the player is looking to achieve? And then where does that also, the extra question for this sort of part of it is, where does that intersect with where you want to take the story as a DM? So you have to think about, you know, this player has come to you with a set sort of rival that they need to implement, but now maybe you're kind of invest into the main story. You need to think about certain obstacles that your players can come across where it makes sense for that player's rival to show up. You can't just drop them into the story willy-nilly, because it needs to have kind of real reasons to be there. So that's kind of where it takes it away. You just kind of enter your DM mind palace and start thinking about, okay, what is this rival's ultimate goal? What do they want to achieve, and where would that intersect with where the party are right now?
How does it feel natural to what's going on in the game as we play?
Yeah.
And I think as a player, there's a lot of freedom here, because you can do this on a multiple different levels. Like if let's say you're creating a character that's 6th level, at that point you're probably writing a backstory where you've been an adventurer for a little bit, right? Or you've been a member of the Home Guard or something. You know, there's some sort of achievement because you're starting off at a higher level, and that can be fun, because then you've got the freedom to say, hey DM, I'd like to make a rival for me that's, you know, someone who was in my garrison, for example, or someone who was in my old adventuring group, and I left that group because they wronged me, or we lost, someone died, you know, trauma. That's a lot of fun. There's always trauma. It's always a little bit edgelord. Or you can create a level 1 character, or even do this as a 6th level, it's fine. But if you're creating a level 1 character, you think, how do I make a rival that's like a rival? I've not really done anything. I'm not an adventurer yet. That's where you create maybe a cousin or a brother or sister, or you create a kid from the village who used to beat you up. Like that's a bit dark, but you know, anything, like it can be small. And as a DM, if someone comes to me and says, here, I've made a rival, I'm going to put it in the game somewhere, because you don't make something and not want it to be in the game. So if you came to me with a small character like that, they tend to be the best ones, because they come up out of nowhere. Like you can be adventuring, fighting dragons, head back to base, back to hometown, wherever that is, and be out at the market, and you bump into Billy Two Shoes, who used to tease you as a kid.
Another great pick from the Mind Palace. Yeah,
thank you, Billy Two Shoes. Yeah, I know, it's just genius going on back here, mate, honestly.
Absolutely.
And even though you've got confidence in yourself, you just slayed a dragon, you're powerful, he's going to look at you like you are no bigger than a stone on the floor, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of fun to play off, because that I find that that's where the players get really into it. They're like, no, I've done this and this and this, and your NPC's like, yeah, but did you run for town president? Because I'm town president now. That's important, and that's a lot of fun. So there is no small part in drama school, and there is no small NPC in my eyes. You can definitely use that stuff.
Definitely. This is the thing, and it's so interesting to think about how you can implement this and how you can work it into your own games. So talking about it, moving on taking my DM hat off and putting my player hat on from a game that I play in, my dwarf cleric is sort of a Twilight cleric from sort of Minton, and his whole backstory thing was that he was a colonel in an army, and while under his command, he woke up one morning and had found that his whole battalion had essentially been decimated by a necromancer and undead, and the only reason he survived is because he literally just bolted in the middle of the night and ran into the woods until he started hearing the voice of Saloon, which is where he starts his kind of cleric path. So you've got like a really interesting, like you were talking about, like I've given the DM here's my rival, this is something that you can build. But as you're talking and thinking about other ways that you can implement rivals into this same character's or this same player's sort of backstory, and just implementing it on such a smaller scale, maybe it's not something that character's aware of, but maybe on a raiding party for this battalion, there was a casualty of a sort of smaller sort of child on a village, or there was a raid that happened that this player is not necessarily responsible for, but it's because of their actions that this has happened. So there you can really build a really interesting tension and really interesting, cool story beats, because it's because of that player's actions that has led to this rivalry, even though they're not necessarily aware that there's a rivalry happening at the start of the game.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. I think it's, to just sort of sum it up a little bit as well, like it's one of those things that gets overlooked, especially by newer DMs who are like, I've got so much to think about. I've got to think about the villains and the encounters and the story, and that's fine. But when you get to the point where you start to think about, okay, how do I flesh this out a little bit and give a little bit more of a I don't want to say friction, but a little bit more of meat to the bones, then this kind of stuff is where you can start. And if you do it right, if you really ham up those characterizations and give them their meanings, they're going to come off as some of the biggest characters that the party interacts with, and they're the ones that will be remembered.
Definitely. And we've talked a lot about like this kind of cathartic rival, this person that's like you build up, you work into the story, and it really leads to that sort of cathartic moment with the party. But there's also a couple of like smaller scale rivals that you can do and you can implement into your games that I wanted to talk about as well.
Go on.
So there's a couple. So you've got like an encounter boss is what I'll call it as. And this is a rival that will show up once in a while, could antagonize your party and kick some dust at them for a bit. But these are a lot easier to set up than what we've been talking about before, because all we really need to do is implement them maybe a session or two ahead of the of where you want the encounter to happen. And all you need to make sure of is make sure that the rival that you're implementing into your game has a little bit of power that the player character wants. Maybe you've got a rogue in the party and this person is the head of the Thieves Guild, but they have certain aspirations and certain things that puts them head to head with that roguish character. That leads to a really interesting encounter, but as soon as the rogue sees that this kind of Thieves Guild head person is sitting in the head honcho chair, there's already going to be a sense of tension there, and there's already going to be a sense of, I want that chair that's going on there. And that's a really interesting thing that you can implement with like a couple of sessions prep time. Now, an interesting one that I'm really excited about, and I think anybody can implement into the game, is a rival as a minion. Now, hear me out on this.
Okay.
Hear me out on this, because it might not be everybody's thing. These are not as epic as everything that we've been talking about so far, may not be as satisfying for the players or cathartic, but they are hilarious if done and played for laughs. Having a character that is clearly not at the PC's power level, but declares themselves a nemesis is really funny and will make your players' characters feel really powerful, as well as just have a lot of laughs at the table. Like, just imagine like a tiny little goblin character against a level 17 paladin and just walking up and saying, declaring himself a nemesis. Like, that could be a really hilarious encounter, and definitely something that you shouldn't shy away from including in your games, along with those big epic cathartic minions as well.
Definitely. I think the issue you'll have is they might just get absolutely decimated and destroyed the moment you bring them in. So you've got to have a way to maybe have them reappear. So maybe have a way for them to potentially get away. Give them an escape plan. Don't railroad it, but give it an escape plan. I think the other way of doing that is, if you find you've got a party of characters who are going about doing things and not really thinking about their actions, there are consequences that they are not seeing because maybe they don't hang around long enough. Like, oh yeah, we've cleared out the goblin raid and we've gone in and we celebrated in the small town tavern and we drank it dry, and then we traveled to the next town and we bought out all of the food because we needed it for our journey. So you've got two towns there who are suddenly thirsty and very hungry. Somewhere down the line, level 17, this little band of villagers, when they arrive to one of these small towns they visited before, gets all their pitchforks out and tries to run them out of town because they're their rivals. They came in and they just wrecked shop. Like, stuff like that. If they pop up later on and the players have no idea that they've made this rival, it's a fun sort of surprise and drop back down to earth of, oh, we ruined these people's lives for a few weeks because they had no ale.
Wait, we're not the good guys? What happened? Like, why are these villagers shouting at me that I stole their sourdough? This is terrible.
Have we got skulls on our caps? Are we the bad guys? Yeah. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are the bad guys. But yeah, and you can do that with a comedic minion as well, a goblin that pops up at the end and says, I've been following you for 3 weeks. You're my nemesis. You killed my partner or something. I don't know. It could be anything.
How dare you? And maybe this goblin is cursed. Maybe they do kill him every single time and he gets raised because of this curse. And he runs into existence. And he just comes back and says, I'm back again, ready to get you. It's just...
Joe had in his homebrew campaign, he had this like highwayman character that he's spoken about before, who had these boots that could make him run very, very fast, and he was a fool basically, and he turned up once and tried to rob the party when we were quite low level, and we had a fight in him and he got away. I think he stole some gold or something. It was very minor, and it was a fun encounter, and we kind of hated the guy. And then he popped up later on when we were like level 7, and just as confident as he was before, tried to rob us. And of course we were like, oh, not this guy again, we're going to deal with him. James's character, who was a very law-abiding, hard-on-you kind of cleric, managed to capture him and, like, I think he chopped his hands off or something. It was really gruesome.
Oh, wow.
But, yeah, he was like, you're a thief. I'm going to chop off your hands, a typical kind of medieval punishment. And I think... We stole his boots and we left him out in the wilderness on his own, like bleeding out. And we walked away from that thinking, oh, how fun will it be when he pops up again next time? And Joe just had to tell us like 3 sessions later when we kept talking about like, guys, he's probably not gonna pop back up. You left him for dead. Like he's done. He's got no hands and no boots and he's in the wilderness.
That's amazing.
And that was a fun way of doing that.
I did something similar. I did a similar thing with my homebrew game where they were kind of traveling towards a set of salt mines to kind of stop a cult from doing their sort of evil plans and getting all of that stuff sorted. On the way on the journey, they were attacked by a group of bandits. The bandits were clearly not a match for what the party wanted to do, but I knew that was going to be the thing. And once they got to a certain level where the encounter looked like it was definitely going to stop, I just had the bandits surrender and just be like, guys, like, this is insane. How do you have this amount of power? We got to stop. And they ended up doing that, the whole stripping them, taking all of their items, taking all of their gold, and then just bolting as far as they could, and then re-implementing that group of bandits a little bit later on in that campaign where they're just walking along and doing something else, and they just see another group that's just kind of camping along, and then seeing the fear in those bandits' eyes as they're interacting with that party. It just makes for a very, very interesting and very cool encounter where the players feel really, really powerful as well.
Yeah, and it's always good fun to give the players a chance to feel that they're strong as well. So that's never a bad thing to do. Oh, dude, there's a lot there. We've I can't believe an hour's gone by already.
Yeah, we've done it. We've completed Tinker's Toolbox. We can close it now. We've done it all.
Yeah, that's the end of the podcast. We've peaked. No more episodes. We're done.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming on and chatting to me. It's been a lot of fun. Just remind us where we can find you and all the things you do on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to follow me and keep up with my D&D and other life musings, you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter is Tariq T Khawaja. That's at Tariq T Khawaja. If you want to follow myself DMing for a group of very talented bards as they walk and travel and experience adventure in the world of Exandria and the continent of Wildemount, you can find us at TWB Plays D&D on Twitch, and we're on YouTube and all other social media places as well. So yeah, check out that podcast, The Wandering Bards of Wildemount, and have a listen to it and see what you think.
Yeah, wonderful. And do check it out because it is a lot of fun and it's a very unique way of running a D&D game and just a blast to watch. If you want to get involved with We Speak Common, all of the usual places are the place to go. We are We Speak Common on Twitter. We are on Instagram at We Speak Common. And if you want to drop an email and drop a suggestion, WeSpeakCommon@hotmail.com. On the Twitter, the Instagram, and at WeSpeakCommon.com, you can find all the links to listen to the show, as well as YouTube and all the other podcasting platforms. And if you really want to show your support and get involved, then there is a Patreon. Links in all of the social medias and in the description below. And it gets you access to a very nice and populated Discord server where we chat pretty much every day about D&D stuff, so you can come and join us there. Thank you very much, dude. I will take away all of your advice around rivals and implement it lustily in my games.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Ben. It's been an absolute pleasure being on here, and would love to come back.
Absolutely, we'll sort something out. You have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will speak to you again very, very soon.
All right, you too, mate. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening today. If you like the show, do us a favour, leave us a like and review on your platform of choice, and share us with your friends. Send us to your fellow DMs and players so that we can build our community even more. It really helps to get us out in front of more eyes. If you want to support the show, you can by joining our Patreon. Links can be found in the show description and the episode descriptions on all platforms. The music in the podcast is Street Dancing by Timecrawler82. It's licensed under a Creative Commons license by NC. You can find it on the Free Music Archive.